Hey there, it's Beck, or Beck the Noir Cosplay on Instagram, and I just did a commission for Toko from Dangonrompa, the first game, and I just want to show you guys a time lapse slash kind of overdub tutorial thing. So this is the wig straight out of the bag. I always get worried when I take wigs right out of the bag because they always look a little bit on the ratty side, a little bit thin. I always hold out hope for all of them, even the cheap Amazon ones that I tend to get because I have no money. Um, so I am a firm believer in just about any wig you can make look decent, even the old ratty knotted ones that have been in your possession forever and you forgot where you got them from. Um, so what I started to do here was I brushed the whole thing out. I ended up taking and backcombing or teasing it. I spray both sides of the wig with hairspray. I tend to use a non-glue based hairspray for this part of the styling because if you use a glue based one you get waves and other things that you might not want in the wig, and I find it really difficult to work with glue based um, hairspray for this kind of work with wigs. So I'm just going through backcombing everything, heating it up with like a flat iron. I personally use a flat iron because I don't own a hair dryer because I just never really had a reason to go out and buy one. But it's just a long process of going through, making sure that I go through and get every single fiber that I see, backcomb it, hairspray both sides, heat it up. There is a point in time where I felt that the um, the first attempt of me backcombing and doing this wasn't good enough after I started brushing them out again. As you can see here, I start brushing them all out. I didn't really feel like it was really, I call it destroying the fibers. I didn't feel like the fibers were destroyed enough to hold the shape that I wanted, or to be as poofy or voluptuous as I wanted it to be. So I ended up doing it a second time, which is perfectly fine to do, but you can tend you can end up burning the fibers if you do it too much, is what I'm trying to say. Um, so yeah, I'm just going through, and even though I spent all that time in the beginning brushing the wig out, I went and teased it and I made it all knotted again. And then, even though I made it all knotted, I go through and I brush it out again. And as you can see, the bottom of the wigs, the sections that I ended up working in, start to look super full, like more full than they were to start out with in the beginning. I was having some problems with my wig head here. It was getting a little frustrating. That's kind of a thing throughout the entire video, is I tend to have problems with that wig head. It's a little bit too big for my stand. Um, but yeah, I just go through, brush them all out, and depending on if I like them or not, I just keep them. I know a couple wigs I've gone back and done this at least 3 to 4 times, depending on the style that I want. You just have to be careful with that heat. Um, and that's basically the basics of getting a fluffy wig out of a cheap one, expensive one. Epic cosplay wigs honestly work wonderful with this styling method. I know a lot of people don't use Epic cosplay because their wigs can tend to be shiny straight out of the bag. They tend to lack volume. If you do this to the fibers, I guarantee that your wig will look like you put 2 to 3 wigs together, and all that shininess will be gone. Just because Epic, I feel like their wigs are made to be styled more so than to be worn straight out of the bag. Whereas I haven't personally worked with Arda, but I heard that Arda is not like that. But that's why I personally use Amazon wigs a lot as well, because you can take this method as long as the fibers are heat resistant up to a certain degree. Um, you can take a cheap, like $10 Amazon wig, do this technique with it, and here's where I'm redoing that one part of the wig where I didn't really like the volume I was getting when I started to brush it out. But yeah, you can take a cheap Amazon wig and have the same type of quality come back. You can take a thin, shiny Amazon wig, and this gets that shine out of it, and it will make it look fuller without adding wefts to it. This wig in particular, I did add a couple wefts to, just so that way the part in the back of the braids had like a decent looking part. As you can see, I start to part it out in the back. I kind of do a rough little thing, and then I slowly start to refine it as I work. And then I just clip the two pigtail braids there, just for the time being. And I try to get all the little wispy baby hairs away. And then here's where I add the first weft. I think I ended up adding a total of 3 wefts. I didn't need that many. I had a second wig that was exactly the same as this one that I ended up taking a couple of wefts off of, that I'll just be using for spare purple wefts if I ever need them, or to use for like different hairlines and stuff if need be. But I go through and I ended up taking hot glue just because I've been having some problems with my back lately, and me sitting there sewing these wefts in would definitely take a toll on me, and I probably couldn't physically handle that at the moment. But I just pinned the wefts back, ended up gluing the sides. It's hard to see here. I ended up gluing the wefts in the opposite direction than I wanted them to lay. So that way when I pulled them over, the wefts kind of covered up the actual sewing at the top of the weft that kept all the hair together. So that is what I am doing here. And it was kind of a little bit of a trial and error with this, because I am not the best at this technique yet. I am slowly working on it, but the more that I do it, the better. And then I ended up taking a small, or like a shorter weft, and then using it as filler in the back because I could still see some of the top of the weft in there and it was bothering me. So I took a shorter length of weft, I folded it in half, I glued it on there, and then here I am parting the hairs down either side and heating them to lay them the direction that I wanted with my hair straightener. So I start taking bobby pins and kind of pinning them where I want. And then I figured it was easier for me to pin them with the bobby pins and then go back and heat them up later, which is what I end up eventually doing. So I end up going through and just pinning them all. I take the wefts one strand at a time and I cross them over each other so that way it hides the wefts. And this is me attempting to heat it up with my hair straightener because I do not have a hair dryer again. And I just heat them up and I move them in the direction that I want them to, and I try to hold them there as long as I can, but it is hot plastic, and hot plastic tends to burn your hands. And then I figured I'm just going to leave them like that for now, and I'm going to work on the braids because I know I could probably fix any mistakes with that later because there are plenty of mistakes right there at the moment. But it's a lot easier, instead of worrying about one section, I feel like it's a lot easier to kind of jump into different directions when you kind of get stumped with things, and then you can fix them a little bit later, which is what I end up doing with that back there. So I ended up starting to pin all those little pieces to the side after I got the braid in, so that way I knew where all the pieces were supposed to go, so that way they didn't look like random small pieces in the back. And I just braided both sides in a simple 3-strand braid. I separated the bangs in the front the best I could, and this was me trying to figure out what was bang and what wasn't. It took me a couple tries there. And then I just went through and braided a normal 3-strand braid. I had talked with the person who was commissioning me about it, and they mentioned that they wanted poofier braids. And I'm getting down there in low, so that way I know the braids are the same length. And here I am pinning the small little pieces again, and I'm hairspraying them in the direction I want them to go, and me attempting to fix my wig head yet again. And then I thought I would start working on the bangs, and so I'm doing the same technique with the bangs that I did with the long strands of hair. I did the back combing, hairspray both sides, heat them up real well. With the bangs, I like to kind of do it a little bit more than I would with like the longer strands of hair. For bangs, I feel like they tend to be poofier, they tend to be a little bit more gravity defying. So I did a really tight tease on all of these. I did a lot of heat. I made sure my hands were burning a little bit while I was touching them, that sort of thing. Um, so I did all of that, and then I waited. I went back to the first weft that I did, so that way I knew it was dry and cool, and I just started brushing it out, just like I did with the back. But like I was saying about the pigtails, I go back and I play with them a bit more to make them poofy. Um, and I really, really love the look at the end of how they ended up. Because bangs are more spiky, more gravity defying, that sort of thing, I tend to really enjoy working on them the best, just because I love to personally spike things. Any wig that's super spiky, give it to me any day. I would love to style that for somebody. Those really anti-gravity ones I absolutely adore, like the ones that you cannot believe or have no idea how they are currently standing. That hair that goes straight in the air, I love it. But I'm just going through, I section out the bangs. I know Toko because I played the Dangonrompa games. I very much enjoyed them. I knew her braids. I just couldn't remember how her bangs went. I would recommend having a reference picture with you at all times during your styling, but because I did know the character previously, I just went ahead and did her braids like I normally would do braids. And then I'm working on her big bang that swoops off to the side. This one kind of caused me a bit of trouble because I tend to not start cutting until after I start shaping that bang. So I had a lot of extra hair to work with. It was way too much, so it's just a lot of trimming and thinning. I don't have thinning scissors, so I use fabric scissors, and I just slowly start to shape that bang the way that I want it. As you can see with all my attempts to make it stick up with the hairspray, with the clips, with the pins that I put in there, it just wasn't really working out. So then I started working on a different spike, which was the smaller one that kind of goes in front of her face a little bit. That was, again, a lot of hair, way too much for that one little spike. So I start going down, and like I said, because I don't have thinning scissors and I only have fabric scissors, I tend to cut diagonally. So I start to shape with my fingers with the glue-based hairspray. I use 2 different hairsprays on all my wigs, and I just slowly work down and start trimming with that kind of technique that you see me doing with my hands, and I find that it makes a more natural looking cut than cutting straight across or straight down or straight up. I feel like cutting straight up takes forever. I don't have that kind of patience. So that diagonal cut downwards tends to make a more natural looking cut that you can get nice little spikes and stuff out of if that's what you're going for. And it just tends to look really good all around. And then I use the pins to hold the hair in place on the wig head. I don't stick them in all the way. I don't stick them into the spike. I just kind of barely put them into the head, and I let the piece of wig or spike that I'm spiking kind of rest on it. So in that way, when I take the pin out, it stays right where I want it to, because that is where the hairspray dried. You have to give the hairspray a chance to dry, or else it will it won't really stay. It gets too bogged down, too heavy, too wet with that hairspray. It seems like I'm using a lot here, but I'm really doing light spritzes at a time. And then this is me going back and making that pigtail more poofy, like I was talking about before, while I was waiting for that hairspray to dry. Normally, when you hairspray, you want to heat it up with like a hair dryer. I'm sorry, I was trying to think of the word. With a hair dryer, like I said that you're technically supposed to do. Again, I don't have one, so I just let the front of the wig dry while I went back and worked on the pigtails, and then I would just go through and do a once over everything else right after I get done with the pigtails. That extra weft that I had ended up being a little bit longer, just because of the weft being added in a different place than everywhere else. I am reheating up and respraying those back little baby hairs just as touch-ups. I'm bobby pinning a couple things in place. Just last final touch-ups, one last big spray for everything. I just go through, I cut down the spikes, fix up a couple little things that I didn't really like. This is the final look of it, and I love it. Thank you guys for watching.